shark, do-do-do-do-do, daddy shark, do-do-do-do-do, daddy shark, do-do-do-do-do, daddy shark.
Grandma shark, do-do-do-do-do, grandma shark, do-do-do-do-do, grandma shark, do-do-do-do-do, grandma shark.
Grandpa shark, do-do-do-do-do, grandpa shark, do-do-do-do-do, grandpa shark, do-do-do-do-do, grandpa shark. Let's go hunt, do-do-do-do-do, let's go hunt, do-do-do-do-do, let's go hunt, do-do-do-do-do, let's go hunt.
Run away, do-do-do-do-do, run away, do-do-do-do-do, run away, do-do-do-do-do, run away. Safe at last, do-do-do-do-do, safe at last, do-do-do-do-do, safe at last, do-do-do-do-do, safe at last. It's the end, do-do-do-do-do, it's the end, do-do-do-do-do, it's the end, do-do-do-do-do, it's the end.
Dichotomous keys are something you'll find yourself using a lot in biology. A good example of how they're used is maybe you're looking at a picture of an organism and you want to find out what it is. Keys help you to identify a species. Here's an example of how a key might work. You're given 4 different organisms and you want to identify what the name of each one is. We've got an answer grid here, we just want to write the type of bird for A, B, C and D. The key looks something like this. It does look complicated, but it's actually really simple to use. Let's start by trying to identify organism A. We start at part 1 and we say it has yellow feathers or no yellow feathers. If it has yellow feathers, we can see that it's called a weaver. In this case, that's not true. I would say no yellow feathers. So we go to 2. Part 2 states the beak is red. If it is, we go to 3. If the beak is grey, we know it's called a babbler. In this case, I think the beak is red for bird A, so we move on to 3. If the beak is straight, we can identify this as a kingfisher. If it's curved, we identify it as a hornbill. You can clearly see in photograph A that the bird has a very curved beak, so we write hornbill for A. We've identified the first one. We can continue like this for the rest of them. If we want to identify B, we can look at part 1 and say it has no yellow feathers, so we go to 2. Does it have a red beak? Yes, it does, so we go to 3. Is that beak straight? Yes, so it's a kingfisher. If we go on to C, does it have yellow feathers? Well, this one's the easiest one to identify because yes, it does have yellow feathers, so it's called a weaver. If we look at part D, does it have yellow feathers? No. Does it have a red beak? No. Does it have a grey beak? Yes, so we know this one's a babbler. There is another way that these keys can be laid out. It's just a question of using arrows and answering with yes or no statements. Let's use organism B as an example of how to use this type of key. We start at the top, has yellow feathers. Well, organism B does not have yellow feathers, so we follow the no arrow. Does it have a red beak? Yes, we follow down the yes arrow. Is that beak curved? No, it's actually straight, so we follow down the no arrow and we arrive at kingfisher. We've identified it the same way we did in the first exercise. It's just a slightly different method of using the same tool.
Identify species of aliens. There's no right way to do this. Lots of different keys could identify these organisms for us. But we start by dividing them into 2 groups. And I could divide them into 2 groups on the basis of color. I could do it on the number of eyes. I'm going to do it based on whether they have legs or not. So I'm going to divide the ones that don't have legs from the ones that do have legs, and these will be my first 2 choices on my dichotomous key. So the first thing I've done is to divide those without legs from those with legs. I'm then going to direct the user of my key to another number to further divide each group. So this first group, I'll tell my user to go to number 2. Be sure that you send them to 2, not 2A, not 2B. We're just going to number 2, where we'll have instructions on how to further divide these. For the rest of them, I'm going to need to jump to number 5. I have 4 organisms here. I'm going to need 1 fewer choice than I have organisms. I'm going to need 3 more choices. So I'm going to go from 2 with an additional 3, and I'm going to tell my user to go to 5. Now I'm ready to look at 2. I need to figure out a way to subdivide these by looking for characteristics that 2 of them share. I could do it by color, green or not green, but I'm going to do it by eyes, one-eyed or more than one eye. So 2 has divided those with one eye from those with more than one eye. At 3, I need to distinguish between those that have one eye. Normally I would give the name of the species here. I don't want to come up with names for these guys, so I'll just put their picture here. But if it's pink, we've uniquely identified that species. If it's green, we've identified our other species. Now we need to identify these 2. And again, there's no right way to do this. I could do this by color. I could do this by shape. I'm going to do it by the number of eyes. All of these have now been uniquely identified. So now I need to go on to 5 and figure out a way to subdivide these remaining species. I'm going to do it, and I can do it in lots of different ways, but I think I'm going to look at eyes on stalks versus eyes that are not on stalks. So I now have them divided into 2 groups. I'll go to 6 to further identify these. There's 2 here, 2 minus 1 is 1, so I need to go 1 further to identify all of these. So let's start at 6. I could maybe use color or number of eyes to distinguish between these 2. So I now have these 2 uniquely identified, and I'm ready to go on to the rest. Notice that I don't have every green alien here in this category. To get to 6, I first had to choose legs, then I had to choose eyes on head, so it's only the green one that has both legs and eyes directly on its head that ends up here, and it is uniquely identified, even though we do have some other green aliens. Okay, I could divide these up by color, I could divide them up by number of eyes. I think I'm going to divide them up based on whether or not they have arms. So again, I have these divided up into 2 groups, and then I'll go to another number to divide them up further. When you're doing a key to your organisms, it might be helpful to just list characteristics and then look for ones that can divide them up into 2 groups and then divide those up into 2 groups and so on. Alright, I'm going to then use color as a way to distinguish these 2. And the key becomes easier as we go along. We now have these 2 uniquely identified. Notice that we have green again, but we've gotten here in a different pathway, so we won't be confused. We're never going to jump directly to green. We're going to have to choose legs and then eyes on the head or eyes on the stalk, so we will distinguish between those 2. Lastly, I can use the number of legs to distinguish between these 2. So I now have a dichotomous key that I could use to identify these alien species. My key could then be used by someone else to classify a new alien. I would go through the choices. I have legs, so I jump to number 5. My eyes are on my head, so I jump to number 6. This guy is green, so I would classify it right there.
All right, let's do this.